I'm Dave Breakenridge, and this is Under the Dome. We're in the waning days of a united conservative leadership race that's largely focused on one issue, sticking it to Ottawa. That seems to be a winning strategy so far for frontrunner Danielle Smith, but with less than 2 weeks remaining, can Travis Toews or Brian Jean overcome that hurdle? We'll talk about that and more on today's episode of Under the Dome. My guest today, from the Calgary Herald, we have columnist Braid, and from the Edmonton Sun, we have columnist Lorne Gunter. Thanks very much for joining me, guys. I figure we should jump right in. It's a busy time in Alberta politics. We are just 2 weeks out, roughly, from vote counting day or voting day in the UCP leadership race. It has dominated Alberta politics over the last few months since Premier Jason Kenney announced in May he would be stepping down as Premier and as leader of the United Conservative Party. I guess first off, because it's been a couple months since, I've had you guys on the show, since we've talked about the UCP leadership race here on Under the Dome. Early on in this race, we had Danielle Smith come out fairly strongly. One of her big platform planks was related to the Alberta Sovereignty Act, whereby Alberta could, go against any federal laws that they felt impeded on Alberta's jurisdiction. That seems to have stuck all the way through the race. This has really been a race about who can go against Ottawa the hardest. And Don, we'll go to you first on this. Are you surprised that the race has looked like that for so long?
Yeah, at the beginning, Danielle Smith took a big gamble. She and Rob Anderson, who was part of the original author of the whole plan, they took a gamble. They were going to go hard on this subject that Danielle obviously believes in very strongly. They're going to go hard on this, and well, it could have flopped. And it's also a kind of thing like a single issue campaign. She's got other policies, but everybody pays attention to this. A single issue campaign is hard to focus on all the way through for 3 months, 3.5 months, right? But she seems to have maintained the momentum. I thought a couple of weeks ago the tide might be turning a little bit. But we don't have any real evidence of anything, really. We have campaigners saying, surprisingly, people who are supposed to be close to Danielle, with the members saying that she's going to win this thing. I rarely heard that being admitted, even by Poilievre's competitors recently. So, yeah, I was surprised. It's in some senses a brilliant campaign if you look at it in purely political terms. Because she picked it, she stuck with it, she wrote it, has fought off so far all the criticism, it seems, at least with the party members. Of course, the political consequences of it might be a different matter entirely.
Mm-hmm. And Lorne, for you, why do you suppose it's appearing to be a winning strategy for her, despite the fact, I know that both of you have written columns that have been critical of it. We've seen political and constitutional experts come out and say this is bonkers, to be frank, and Premier Jason Kenney and Travis Toews as well have come out against it. Why do you suppose it's appeared to kind of keep her as the front runner so far?
I think there's two things here. One is what she has been doing, and Don, I think, identified that accurately. She's been able to keep this issue top of mind, but she's been able to do that, I think, because she plumbed the discontent among UCP members better than anyone else at the beginning of this, and said, this is not about the party's response to COVID. It's not about the Sky Palace dinner. It's not about MLAs who went off to tropical vacations when the rest of us thought we were supposed to be in lockdown. This was about the handling of Trudeau, and Trudeau is hated in Alberta. I can't imagine that there is any other politician, including Vladimir Putin, who would be more hated in Alberta than Justin Trudeau. And she felt, and I think quite accurately, that after 4 years of coziness with the Liberals under the NDP, Jason Kenney had not gone hard enough after the Feds. And she has decided to go ultra hard on them. And I don't think people pay attention to the specifics of any of this. They just know she's hammering Ottawa, and that's what they want done. I wrote a column early on in this saying that she doesn't particularly seem to understand the division of powers between Section 91 and 92 of the Constitution. People don't care about that. Right. I care about it. Don cares about it. I'm assuming you care about it. Then, the constitutional experts who've lined up to gasp over this care about it. But most Albertans simply see somebody who, after 7 years of kind of weak-kneed responses to Ottawa, is just banging at them. This is sort of Ralph Klein's "Let the Eastern Bastards Freeze in the Dark" all over again. People don't care about the specifics. But the other thing that I think has been critical to her keeping this as the front and center issue is the fact that the other 6 candidates have all decided to be like little chihuahuas and circle around her going, yip, 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 you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And they have not, any of them, articulated any other policy that would catch the imagination the way Danielle's policy has. And they have made it easy for her to keep this number one, because Travis Toews, really smart guy, rancher, accountant, did a good job by all accounts as finance minister. What's his number one issue? I don't know. And we do this for a living, and I don't know what his number one issue is.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. The idea that as soon as Danielle Smith came out with the Alberta Sovereignty Act and through early debates in this race, it all seemed to be everyone going on the attack against that one specific policy. And Don, do you feel like Lorne said that these opponents played into her hands by focusing on it? And did they wait? I know recently the race has kind of focused a little bit more. There's been some more talk about healthcare in the race, mostly with Travis Toews and Danielle Smith. But do you feel that they played into her hands by really jumping on that and not trying to pivot to another issue?
Well, they agree with her on a lot of stuff, all of them, and of course Todd Loewen is with her four square. He's not necessarily the biggest chihuahua because he's not criticizing Danielle at all. In fact, he's completely in lockstep with her. But the other ones, if you look at their platforms and what they've said, they all have some form of "we got to get even with Ottawa," or "we got to do much better with Ottawa," but they're not getting none of the anger vote is coming to them. And Anderson and Danielle, and they're the key ones here, made the conclusion early that people just, as Lorne said, don't care. They don't care about, in fact, they'll even get mad if you mention that there's a constitution at issue here. Barry Cooper summed it up perfectly, what Danielle's doing, one of the co-authors of the strategy, when somebody said, but this is unconstitutional. And he said, that's the whole point. Because Ottawa is acting unconstitutionally in our judgment, and so I think that's the kind of comment, that's the kind of attitude that's really scoring. So we're looking at a situation here where what are 123,000 people eligible to vote? So maybe 50,000 vote for Danielle, maybe 60,000 by the time it's all over, because she's never showed in any of these sort of quasi-invisible polls much more than 40%. And that's going to be the policy of the province. It's going to be a very interesting post-convention period if she wins it, I'll tell you.
Yeah, I Lorne, from your perspective, we've had people do mail-in ballots. Obviously, there are people who can still vote, members can still vote on October 6th, but a lot of this is being done in advance voting. Is there anything right now that, say, Travis Toews, who in polling, and we can talk about the polling in a little bit, but is there anything that Travis Toews can do to turn it around at this point to get himself a leg up? So, even if he's behind on the first ballot, could potentially pick up those down ballot votes from other candidates to win this thing?
Not likely. I think that our sense of this, our reading of the tea leaves, quite apart from the polls that we will discuss shortly, is that she's created all the fire, all the heat, all the light, and as a result of that, she is within striking distance. Is she close enough that she can win on the fourth or fifth ballot with enough added support from the candidates who get dropped off as we go through? That's a key. Typically, when you have a controversial frontrunner like this, they need to get to 45% in order to get over 50 as the other candidates drop off, because almost everybody's second choice is not the controversial frontrunner. And so you will probably see, I would think, 4 ballots, maybe more, where Toews keeps coming up and coming up and coming up, and Smith inches closer to 50%, but does she actually get to 50%? If she's at 40% on the first ballot, she maybe doesn't. If she's at 45 on the first ballot, yeah, she probably does. So and Don pointed out a very good measure there is that Todd Loewen's people, he's maybe going to get 3 or 4 or 5% of the vote. They are predisposed to go to Danielle. So if she's within 5%, she picks up Loewen's people, a few hangers on from others, and she's over 50.
Yeah. So Don, from your perspective, we're probably not going to see a repeat of the federal conservative vote back when Andrew Scheer came up from behind with, Maxime Bernier was leading, and then all of a sudden he was losing.
Yeah. But, Loewen is strong. Loewen out in the countryside, there are lots of people are going to vote for Todd Loewen and put Danielle second. He'll be a cabinet minister. We can start almost thinking now about if this does happen, we're going to have a new cabinet very soon. Who's going to be in it? Well, one of the problems they've all got is that they are all politicians and they all want a job. And if they're too mean to Danielle, they're not going to get one. And Leela here, had that face-off with Danielle about racism last week. That was a remarkable exchange. And maybe she's ruled herself out. Although Danielle, her people told me the other day that she'll forgive everybody. There's none of this kicking out of caucus. There's none of this. Everybody's going to get along fine. But so what you've got is a political race where somebody's proposing something that is arguably unconstitutional, and you've got 5 people who are not willing to come right out really hard and tell. They did it a bit, so at the beginning they sort of faded off that because they know it's not working. So, but then once again, Ed Stelmach had 14% on the first ballot in 2006, and he won. And Alison Redford was way back in second in 2011. I think I said 2006, 2011, and he won. But that in those cases, both of them, there was intervening time before the next ballot. This is all.
There was 2 weeks between the first and the second ballots, and that allowed organization, more membership sales in some cases. Klein was not in first place when he won, but his people went out in the 2 weeks that they had between ballot 1 and ballot 2 and really sold hard that you have to vote for this guy because he's anti-establishment. He's the one who's going to stand up for Alberta. He's the one who's going to stand up to all the elites. And it worked really well for him. This one, because of course you have to send in one ballot with all your second, third, fourth, fifth choice marked down on the ballot, the same one ballot. There isn't going to be horse trading in between ballot 1 and ballot 2. There is even in a brokered convention. You have that horse trading that goes on between the first ballot and the second ballot and the third ballot. That doesn't exist in these preferential ballot elections. So that is done. And so where we see the snapshot now is, I think, a very good indication of where the first ballot is going to be. And then the discussion simply becomes who got the most second choices, the most third choices of ballots that are already sealed in envelopes and in the mail.
Yeah, and as we alluded to before, about 60% of votes had already been cast as of last week, so we could be up to 78%. So all the campaigning now, people can't change their minds. And of course, on voting day, they could probably produce the sixth ballot. If say it goes to 6 counts, they could probably produce it within 30 seconds because the computer does it all. So I imagine there's going to be some drama making your way here for second, third, fourth, and fifth, but they're going to be almost.
They have said they will announce the results from the first ballot, and then they will have a pause, and they will announce the results of the second ballot. But Don's absolutely right. This would take, if not seconds, mere minutes to go all the way through however many permutations of balloting they need to go through, because it's all done by computer. But this puzzles me. They're going to have this drama where they have the pauses between the ballots, but they picked a Thursday night. Why are they making this announcement on a Thursday? They're going up against Thursday night football. Now, I don't know what the game is on October the 6th, but you're going to have to, well, you would probably order me, Dave, to watch the balloting so that I can write about it for the following day. But otherwise, I would be watching the NFL. And so I think it's a bizarre choice to have picked a weeknight.
One thing I wanted to ask about, and Lorne brought it up, and it's something that I do find curious about the conservative movement in Alberta. We talk about Ralph Klein was an anti-establishment candidate who came in and won and then became the establishment. And Ed Stelmach, he was a cabinet minister under Klein, but at the end of the day, he was running against an establishment candidate in Jim Dinning, and he ultimately won. And Alison Redford, I feel like, wasn't the establishment candidate against Gary Marr and Doug Horner. And then, we had this implosion of the party eventually, but now we have an anti-establishment candidate who, despite having a history in Alberta politics, was really coming in as the outsider and seems to be poised to win the whole thing. What is it about the conservative movement where they really go after these leadership candidates who aren't part of the movement or aren't part of the establishment? And then, eventually, if she wins and, wins the election next spring, will become the government and the establishment. And then we might see this whole thing in a few years. What is it about the conservative vote that really leans towards these kind of candidates?
Lorne?
Well, I think we like to be renegades. We like to be cowboys. We like to think of ourselves as being on the frontier. And we do get set upon by Ottawa in all sorts of ways that no other province has to deal with. So you start with that. But there is this notion that, we're all for freedom. We're all for small government. We have, depending on whose calculations you use, either the biggest or the second biggest spending government per capita of any province in the country. And that has been consistent, except for the trough during Dinning and Klein. That's been consistent for 30 years. So we have a small government mentality that funds one of the biggest governments going. And so there's an awful lot of inconsistencies in Alberta mentality, but we like to think of ourselves as the rogues. And so we like to elect leaders who are not seen as establishment types.
And the whole thing with Danielle is she's the only one who isn't elected, and she's going to have to get a seat. She wouldn't dare run in Calgary Elbow, which Schweitzer vacated because it's too dangerous for her. But they'll get her a seat really quickly. But it's interesting, isn't it, that all the rest of them are elected politicians. This is partly a campaign against elected UCP people, because people in the party have been absolutely furious at the government, furious at ministers like Sonny and Schultz and others who have basically gone along with everything that happened, including Sky Palace, without speaking out. They speak out now, and the members say, yeah, where were you? Where were you when it really mattered? So being elected,
and that's a fascinating point that Don brings up, because Danielle Smith committed perhaps the most outrageously political act any of them have ever been involved in, and that was the floor crossing in 2014, where she gave up defending her party in order to try and get some stroke with the governing Conservatives, and ended up with not a single cabinet post for any of the people she brought with her. She had the biggest political abandonment of anybody in this whole race, the most blatant, self-aggrandizing political move, and she's not being held account for it. It's amazing to me that Lowen's people might be the people who push her over the top, because as he falls off the ballot, she gets their support and goes over the top, because they would be the people who would be the most angry. I'm guessing most of them are old wild rosers, and they should be the people who are the most fed up with her for having crossed the floor in 2014. But it seems like just bash Trudeau enough. We don't care what happened before.
As she crossed the floor, she actually sent a letter to the party that she just left, advising it to wind itself up, to have a meeting and say, we're no longer a political party, as if you can even do that overnight. It was absolutely stunning. And then if you go back to 2012, the Lake of Fire, Wild Rose is going to win that election. And then along came this fellow who said gays are going to burn an eternal lake of fire. Danielle was advised strongly by her campaign people to fire that guy immediately. She didn't. And the next weekend they got clobbered, and they thought they were going to win, to the extent that Rod Love was on the floor of in Highwood that night giving interviews to be used after they'd won. They were so convinced they were going to win, but they lost because of her. And it becomes a question of political judgment. Does she really have any? Has she learned some? And then the other, of course, extreme oddity is that it was Brian Jean who came in and saved Wild Rose, and Wild Rose elected everybody, the Conservative side, and the PCs elected very few. And now look, she's going to beat him. She's going to beat all these people who tried to rescue.
Yeah,
Gene for me is the big surprise in
Yeah.
this whole race, in that even his own people will admit to you in candid moments that they don't think they can finish higher than third.
Yeah.
And in fact, in an awful lot of the polling that we have yet to mention, he finishes a distant third. Like he's only above the other four candidates the other also ran, just barely. And here is the man who claims to have put the knife in the front of Jason Kenney and got him out of the way. And I think, well, I said at the time, I have to admit, I was gobsmacked by the fact that Kenney only got 51%. I didn't think he was going to get 65 like his people were saying, but I thought he was upper 50s, and it rattled my instincts a bit for a time because I had misread it so badly. But I did say at the time, I think Gene, in putting the knife into Caesar, has done himself in. That he is not now going to become the leader, even though he gave every indication at that point he was going to run. And I don't think he will. I think he'll be the last one off before the final ballot. But I don't think he's going to do very well at all.
And Lorne, for you, how do you see things shaping up after this leadership vote? And does Danielle need to kind of make inroads with not just the party, but with Albertans in general to keep the NDP from gaining ground?
Yep. Yeah, I think she does. I don't think she makes those inroads by abandoning everything that the mentality she's brought to the leadership, but she can make inroads. She's going to have very low expectations among a lot of undecided voters. The thing that this poll I wrote about showed most, two things. It showed, A, that the undecideds are the big winners out of the UCP leadership race, that none of the main candidates suddenly converts all sorts of swing voters to the UCP, but they don't also move to the NDP. The NDP in this poll keeps 97% of its vote from the last election, from the 2019 election. I've never seen that. I've never seen that kind of loyalty to a party. People switch around all the time. 20, 30% of the population switches around all the time. The NDP keeps 97% of its vote, but it gains very little. And so the UCP leader, whoever it is, whether it's Toews or Gene or Danielle Smith, has a few months to convince these undecided people not to take the next step over to the NDP. And as long as there is no division in that party, as long as there is not a second party that comes out of this leadership race, somebody's mad, they quit, they start their own party, and that drains off enough votes from the UCP to elect the NDP. As long as that doesn't happen, and as long as that leader doesn't do really crazy stuff between now and next March to May, which is the window for the election, then I think the UCP wins. I think it's a very simple formula. If there is one party on the right of center in Alberta, they win. If there are two, the NDP can win.
One thing, if I could say, one danger for Danielle is that people get as mad at her, the people who are supporting her now get as mad at her afterwards as they are at Trudeau right now. Exaggeration, but get the idea. So what happens if, like she's now already said, that they won't have, the House won't sit until November because they need to work up the Sovereignty Act and do a bunch of other things. They need to work up the Sovereignty Act in some fashion. It can be presented to the House that the Lieutenant Governor will accept. The Lieutenant Governor did absolutely nothing wrong, and it wasn't political. Even Jean attacked her as political for saying my job is to see if laws are constitutional and give them royal stamp, right? So what if she doesn't? Okay, well then we got some kind of national crisis that may please a lot of her backing, won't please a lot of other people. But what happens if, as Toews says, it comes back in such a watered down fashion that can't really do anything? And then these people who are mad, they'll turn quickly and be mad at somebody else. So maybe that's what happens to her. Maybe she loses authority almost from the first day because she brings in this milquetoast thing that really doesn't mean very much. She's got to set herself a real challenge.
Yeah. It's fascinating times in Alberta politics. I know we'll be watching on October 6th, maybe, flipping back to the NFL game that night, but we'll see how things shake out after the fact. Don Braid, Lorne Gunter, thanks again.
Thank you.
You bet.
That's all the time we have today for Under the Dome. Don't forget you can find all past episodes at edmontonjournal.com/underthedome, or you can hit that subscribe button on YouTube. I'm Dave Breakenridge. We'll see you next time.